For the audience, I'm Noah Smith, Bloomberg pundit, and go ahead.
Oh, hi, I'm Carl Za, Twitter personality.
Yeah, I also try to be a Twitter personality, but often I just tweet about rabbits. And anyway.
Well, you do have like a large following. I think you have like, what, almost 190K followers?
Yeah, but I'm not sure how much attention they pay to me. So, but yeah, I don't know how.
Well, what I do know is that a lot of people are looking forward to this debate. So let's give them what they want.
All right, let's do it.
Yeah.
So I don't exactly know what the topic of this debate is, but I think it's sort of about China issues, U.S.-China relations,
Sure.
Cold War II, if that actually becomes a thing. So basically, Cold War II. Are we going to have a Cold War? What do you think? Like, what's?
Oh, I think we're already in it. We're just in the early stages of Cold War 2.0 right now.
I think that's true too, unfortunately. And so there's been this amazing rise in sort of negative sentiment about China in the U.S. And the rise really it really spiked after COVID. And there's Pew data on this. It really spiked after COVID because a lot of Americans, wrongly in my view, blamed China for COVID. But it had been rising since about 2013 or so. And then, so there had been some rise, and then it really went up.
Yeah, I mean, the report I saw was the really sharp climb happened around 2017. So we're talking about like a couple of years ago.
Okay.
And then it just went kind of parabolic with COVID and everything that happened.
Right. If I had to guess, I would say that there's been three events. COVID was one. Before that, there was Trump's trade war, which highlighted U.S.-China competition in economics. And before that, there was sort of the I guess the rise to power of Xi Jinping, which I think was well covered in the American press. And there were, Xi Jinping was obviously a different kind of ruler than the Chinese leaders who had come before him. And I think that probably like scared people. That's my guess, because that's the only. What else happened?
I don't know about that, because I mean, how many average Americans talk about Xi Jinping? I mean, I lived in the United States until very recently. I don't think, at least folks around me, they don't talk about Xi Jinping in their everyday life. I mean, people talk about China, right? People talk about the Chinese economy, the U.S.-China competition, how China is going to eat our lunch. But in everyday conversation, outside of like the punditry, outside of the New York Times, Washington Post, and Wall Street Journal editorials, I don't hear people really talk about Xi Jinping as much. I mean, I'm just talking about like average Joe, right, on the streets.
Right. So it might be, that might be a coincidence that negative sentiment started really rising, because before 2013, a plurality of Americans had a positive view of China. And that switched. Around 2013, it switched and the negative started really climbing. So it might have been something else. Maybe they just didn't, I don't know. So.
Well, I mean, there's the tension between U.S. and China have been building before that, right? Like there's Hillary's famous pivot to Asia. That happened around, I think, 2011, 2012. When was she Secretary of State, right? Hillary was Secretary of State until I think 2013, right? I mean, like her famous speech was about pivot to Asia, and she made some remarks about how Pacific Ocean should really be the American lake, and how before that, United States was kind of distracted by its misadventures in Middle East, right? I mean, that started in 9/11, and it's been basically 10 years. We've been bogged down in Iraq, then Syria, we had to fight ISIS, and then around 20. Well, ISIS was still going strong in 2014.
ISIS was like 2013, 2014 that it really became big. And yet at the same time, you had people at the elite level kind of not reacting very strongly to ISIS and saying, we need to ignore the Middle East more and focus on Asia more. I think that was happening. But
well, I think there's different departments, different institutional demands, right? I mean, like, because there's U.S. is so involved all over the globe. There was U.S. was first involved in Libya, right? That Hillary started that, and then as Hillary was leaving, that's when the Syrian civil war kicked off, and U.S. is heavily involved in Syria, and then then the U.S. actually got distracted by Ukraine, right? Because there was a Ukraine crisis
in 2014.
Then there was, yes. So United States attention was kind of all over the place, but the China issue. I mean, I remember John Mearsheimer was giving a speech around that time. He was basically saying that China is really the biggest threat to the U.S. hegemony. China is the near peer competitor, so that U.S. should really pull back from Middle East and make up with Russia to focus on China. And in the beginning, it was only John Mearsheimer, kind of the one lone voice voicing that, but I think with the Trump administration come to office, that the China focus took a more center stage.
That's right. So I mean, Trump made China trade policy a big deal.
Yeah.
And but it can't be just Trump. I mean, if we're in a second Cold War, it's going to be a lot more than one, frankly, crazy American leader who's going to get us into that and sustain that. And it's not.
Oh yeah, I mean, I think. I'm sorry. Go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, and I don't want to make it sound like it's just America either, because I think that China has been making moves on its own. You've seen like a lot more sort of territorial claims in South China Sea has become a much bigger thing in recent years. Sort of clashes with the Philippines over Scarborough Shoal. The fishing boats with Indonesia. Some clashes with Vietnam, and so there've just been, and recently you've seen sort of these clashes between China and India, which maybe they've worked out in the short term, like they had an agreement the other day, but then you've seen like fights between Chinese and Indian soldiers twice recently that were pretty bloody, and a number of people died. And so like you've seen, I would say it's not just America that's sort of changing the status quo. I'd say China's also made a lot of moves there as well.
Well, I like to put in my 2 cents here, if I may. A lot of these territorial disputes have been long existing, right? I mean, China-India border issue goes back to 1950s. It was never settled, and China-India actually fought a war in 1962 over it. And then there have been border skirmishes. That's my dog, because my neighbor just came in. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries.
Hey. So, and also South China Sea, right? I mean, the Chinese claim on South China Sea hasn't changed since like 1940s. I mean, like the PRC's claim to South. Well, before it was actually 11, before it was actually 11 dash line, and it was proposed by Chiang Kai-shek. That was before the communists even came to power. And when Chiang Kai-shek first put his claim to South China Sea, there wasn't really objection from United States, because back then Chiang Kai-shek was an ally to United States. And also back then, most of the littoral states around South China Sea, they were not independent yet, right? Like Vietnam was a French colony, and then the Philippines was American colony. ditto Malaysia, right? So back then there wasn't and Chiang
China
Kai-shek
did
was
fight
supposed to
Vietnam,
be
right? They fought Vietnam over the Parasoc Islands.
yeah that was later, but
80, right?
I mean yes, but in 19 I'm talking about the claim to South China Sea. PRC basically inherited that claim from the previous government, from the KMT government of Chiang Kai-shek. And in fact, if you look at the Taiwan's claim to South China Sea and mainland China's claim to South China Sea, it's the same claim. It used to be 11 dash line because Chiang Kai-shek actually drew the line all the way around, extending around the Vietnamese coast up the Gulf of Tonkin, right? Where the Gulf of Tonkin incident happened, and what when PRC was founded, PRC actually sat down with North Vietnam government. They settled the maritime border between them in the Gulf of Tonkin. So now that's why the extra dash was removed. So now it's only a 9 dash line, and as you mentioned, China did fought a conflict with Vietnam. That was South Vietnam before Vietnam was unified. China fought a conflict with South Vietnam.
That was after. That was when Vietnam, and that was after unification. That was even after the land war between China and
so the Parasoc conflict happened in 1975. So this is when just before South Vietnam was going to steamed over. There are multiple conflicts. There's a couple ones.
Am I thinking of the Spratly one?
Yes. Okay. You are thinking about the one that happened in 1988, I think, 87 or 88. And so in the Parasoc conflict happened when South Vietnam was on its last leg, and then China basically kicked out the South Vietnamese garrison from one of the atolls in.
So I was thinking of the
one of the Parasoc Islands.
One.
So there was there was another one in the 80s. I was in elementary school in China at the time, so I remember this very vividly. This is about 87 or 88. The Chinese Navy went down to Spratly Islands and basically took about 7 or 9 reefs from the Vietnamese, and those are the reefs that was in Chinese possession since the late 80s. Now, I remember back in 80s, also U.S. was okay because back then, like China and U.S. were buddies back in the 80s. It was after Nixon. China was in the anti-Soviet camp with U.S. Both sides cooperated on in Cambodia against Vietnam, and both sides cooperated in Afghanistan against Soviet Union. CIA had a listening station.
Vietnam were the good guys in that conflict, where we cooperated with China against Vietnam and failed because Vietnam was. Vietnam invaded Cambodia to overthrow the Khmer Rouge, which was a good move by Vietnam.
But both United States and China supported Khmer Rouge afterwards versus Vietnam. Also United States and China also supported Mujahideens in Afghanistan against Soviet Union. At the time, CIA actually they purchased a lot of mules from Xinjiang, from all over the places to supply Mujahideens because originally they tried to supply Mujahideens with Tennessee mules, but the Tennessee mules couldn't hack it in the Afghanistan climate, and they were dying in mass. So they thought the next best thing is purchase tons of mules from China, just cross the border in Xinjiang, and drive them to Pakistan and to supply the Mujahideens. And on top of that, CIA actually purchased tons of Chinese-made weapons because America, for some reason, didn't want the weapon to be traced to the U.S. And the Chinese weapons are basically clones of the Soviet weapons. So this is well documented, right? Part of the Operation Cyclone.
So this history stuff is very interesting, but it leads me to another point. The United States and China have did fight each other once in the Korean War, but in
Yes.
general have either been allies or, there's been some de facto cooperation except for the Korean War, they've been mostly allied over like the past century or more. Even starting with, I would say, so there was not just the Cold War alliance against the Soviets, but also World War II, obviously. China, the United States supported, we didn't have a CIA then, but we supported both Chiang and Mao against the Japanese.
Sure. Sure.
And then before that, China was sort of in chaos at the time, but the United States insisted on this so-called open door policy, which prevented European countries from carving China up into colonies or trying to carve China up into colonies.
Okay, I have something to say about that because when I came to United States, I came to United States when I was 13, right? I studied open door policy in U.S. history books, and it was presented as a good thing, right? As a good thing that U.S. did to prevent China from carving up. But what I learned in China is a different perspective, right? What I learned in China before I came to the United States was that U.S. was a latecomer, a late imperialist power in Asia. So by the time the U.S. came to China, China has already been carved up in sphere of influences by European powers and Japan. So that is why U.S. demanded the open door policy. The idea of open door policy is everybody gets an equal share, equal access to the Chinese market. And that was the U.S. position. It's not quite as altruistic as U.S.
I'm not saying it's altruistic. I think that nations are very rarely altruistic. Very rarely.
Sure.
It almost never happens. And when it does happen, it's usually just one leader who has an altruistic motive. But in general, nations are very rarely altruistic. And so the United States didn't do that out of altruism. It did it because it didn't want its competitors to get powerful by controlling large amounts of China. But I guess what I'm saying is that there's been a very long history of United States, either sort of like self-interestedly, but still protecting China from colonization by hostile powers or allying with China in the case of the Cold War.
I think really I think the alliance with China really started with World War II. I mean, before that doesn't really count. Before that, United States is still the bad guy. I'm sorry to say, before World War II, United States was still the bad guy in China because U.S. was part of the eight-nation alliance in crushing the Boxer Rebellion that sacked Beijing. Right. So and also right after, even the Opium War was done by the British, but right after the Opium War, the United States sending its gunship to Guangzhou, demanding China to give U.S. the same treatment that Great Britain got. Right. And United States Navy had been patrolling the Yangtze River ever since the Opium War from 1850s to 1950 until Mao kicked them out. So like for 100 years, U.S. Navy gunboats were sailing up and down Yangtze River, right? So I like World War II was really a turning point because before that, like Europeans, including Americans, have a bad rap in China. But World War II, because Japanese, it was so much worse, and U.S. was an ally during World War II against Japanese. There was a shift in Chinese perception toward particularly Americans. That part is true. But then that changed after the Chinese government changed, with communists coming to power and Korean War. And then it wasn't only until 1972, after Nixon went to China, that the relationship became more normalized and warming up again. So it's up and down.
Now we're seeing a downturn in relations again. Oh, your internet is a little slow here. Can you hear me? You're kind of frozen. Hey, you're
there's a little bit of lag.
Yeah, there's lag. Do you have browser tabs open? So maybe close your browser.
Oh, yes. Let me close one.
Your computer's lagging a bit.
Oh, yeah, just leave one tab open here. Okay, let me close. Okay, my recording's still happening. Okay, great. Back on.
Right. So here's there is this interesting question of whether or not. Oh, you're lagging still.
I'm just listening to you right now.
Okay. So there is this interesting question of whether or not Chinese-U.S. competition is inevitable, and whether or not it's, people talk about this idea of the Thucydides trap. I don't know if I pronounced that right, but then basically this idea that China is a rising power, America is a status quo power, so they're destined to fight. I don't know about that, but it certainly seems like a lot of Americans have anxiety about the fact that America is becoming much less powerful in the world and China is becoming more.
I'm sorry, I had to laugh about the Thucydides trap because just don't fall into the trap, man. It's simple. Just don't fall into the trap.
Don't.
Because right now, I have to make it clear. Right now, it's the U.S. that's mostly U.S. engaging in starting this Cold War against China, because China is perfectly happy with the global system as is, because China has been a beneficiary of the globalization in the last 40 years. I mean, China, after Nixon went to China and after Deng Xiaoping came to power, China pursued what's called the open and reform policy, where it welcomed foreign capitals. He tried to apply for the WTO, right? He tried to join the international system, right? Be what the U.S. official call a responsible stakeholder, right? And China benefited from this.
That was wishful thinking. I mean, American writers said we want China to become a responsible stakeholder. That was just a thing that Americans said that they wanted China to do.
Sure, of course.
By the way, Carl, your video is frozen. I can hear your audio, but your video is frozen. So try turning off video and turning it on again. Can you
stop video?
There you go.
And
try starting
it again. Starting again.
Okay.
Yeah, I just started. Yeah. Maybe I'm just pausing to listen to what you have to say. Sometimes.
No, you were frozen. You were really. I don't think anyone can hold that still. Okay, so I think that America has certainly, under Trump, America has certainly gotten more aggressive against China, but there's no question about that. But I think that China has gotten more aggressive in certain ways, and mostly not against America, mostly against neighboring countries. I think that China has been more aggressive about pressing territorial claims in the South China Sea, in the East China Sea, possibly with India, and possibly with Taiwan. And so I think that, the Scarborough conflict with the Philippines, that we're basically trying to push them out of that area. Much more Chinese territorial incursions, stuff like that. Chinese bomber flights over places have really increased. And so I think that's, these aren't sort of increases in aggression against America, but I think that a lot of neighboring countries in the region are concerned. And if you look at opinion polls, while most countries in the world have a positive opinion of China, or at least neutral, I think that countries near China have a pretty negative opinion. So you look at India, South Korea, Indonesia, Japan, Vietnam, some of these countries, there's these negative opinions of China, and I think they're scared. China's so much more powerful than it used to be, and I think, and it shows some signs of being aggressive about territorial claims, and I think that neighboring countries are scared.
Well, that's a fair point, because for most of these countries' history, I'm talking about the post-colonial history of these newly independent nations, right? For most part of up to recently, China has been not such a big factor. Not as a huge factor as it used to be, right? Because traditionally China had been the preeminent power in East Asia until the European arrived and with Opium War, and then 100 years of disaster in China. So China, when the nations became newly independent in Asia, what they're used to is China that was weak, that was poor, right? But what happened in the last 40 years is that China has pulled itself out of kind of the poverty trap, and now China wants to regain its traditional place in East Asia, and in a way that's kind of upsetting the status quo, right? Because the status quo post World War II is that U.S. act as the hegemon in East Asia to be the the policeman or the peacekeeper, depending who's talking, and countries are used to that. Philippines has a security alliance with United States, right? And so do other countries around the Southeast Asia. Singapore, Malaysia, Thailand, Japan, South Korea. They're all U.S. allies, right? And I agree. They are feeling nervous right now about a rising China, but they're also making adjustment. I mean, you brought up Philippines, right? Philippines have made a quite 180 after Duterte came to power. After he came to power, Philippines have been
that guy's
quite,
as crazy as Trump. That guy's nuts. Who knows what Philippines is going to think after he's gone?
I don't think so. I don't think I'm qualified to talk about Philippine politics because I think it's up to the Filipinos. And as far as I know, Duterte is very popular in the Philippines, and he's even among my Filipino American coworkers, they're most of them are not even political. Even they like Duterte. There's like a 24-year-old who just started working with us in my last company in U.S. And he was born in United States, and asked him about Duterte. He said, "Yeah, I like this guy." And I asked him why, because he said, unlike the previous leader of Philippines who are just empowered to line up their own pockets, Duterte is actually seeming to be doing something. I mean, he's like he seems to be a strong guy, and that's doing something. So that's why he liked him. It's very simple. I mean, not very sophisticated, but that seems to be the popular sentiment. And who am I to argue? But
all right. But let's not get sidetracked into Philippines politics, which we don't really know about. Let's go back to that idea of China. But you agree that the neighboring nations to China are feeling apprehensive about the growth of Chinese assertiveness in the region?
Some, yes, but the reason I raised Philippines is because some nations are also learning to adjust to the new reality of a rising China. I mean, that's what Duterte is doing, right? He's making friends with China to balance against the United States, who he has his own grievance against.
Right. But okay, so let me ask this. The United States, when it first became powerful in the 1800s, implemented what was called the Monroe Doctrine, where the United States basically asserted the ability to, effectively, they said Europeans don't come in and try to control Latin America. But of course, the United States would try to control Latin America and would exert hegemony in the region. And so that's not too different. I know the particulars are different, but it's not too different from the traditional status that China enjoyed in East Asia as the local hegemon. There weren't really global hegemons at the time, but the local hegemon. And so for China to return to that, so I think that was kind of a shitty thing for the United States to do. We have a really bad track record in Latin America of interfering, and if Latin American countries were more powerful, they would have resisted our interference more than they did. They couldn't resist us because we were the big dog and they were small. And they couldn't, and we did asshole things a number of times. And so in the classical era of Chinese dominance in Asia, is that a situation that is just the right and natural way for us to return to? Because I feel that's kind of inappropriate for modern relations.
Well, I think one of the trap that Americans usually fall into when talking about China is assuming that China will turn out exactly to be just like United States, to be like a carbon copy of United States, right? But China is a different civilization. It's a different country. Chinese people think differently. And just one example I can give is Okinawa, right? So right now, U.S. has a large military base in Okinawa, and U.S. basically have been militarily occupying Okinawa since 1945, since the end of World War II, right? The Okinawans, they don't like the American troops there. The majority of Okinawans do not want the American base in Okinawa,
right?
But because of the security alliance between Japan and U.S. And also because Japan does not want U.S. military to be on the mainland Japanese islands, and so they shove all the Americans in Okinawa because they treat Okinawans as kind of second-class citizens. They don't really think them as same as the Japanese people on the main Japanese islands. So when I raised about the issue, people are saying, if Americans gonna leave, China is just gonna come in and put their troops in Okinawa. So I like to go back to history and point out that before Japan annexed Okinawa, that happened in the 1870s. Okinawa used to be its own independent country, the Kingdom of Luchu, right? Luchu Kingdom actually had treaties with United States, and Luchu Kingdom was a tributary of China, right? So it was a voluntary tributary state of China. China never, throughout 500 years of Kingdom of Luchu being a vassal of China, China never once post-military in Okinawa, not even once.
Yeah,
it was
voluntary
a purely
tributary.
trade relationship.
Why would anyone be a voluntary tributary of a place? You don't just send gifts somewhere unless you know that if you didn't, you could face some consequences.
Actually, see, that's your American thinking again, Noah, because what it means to be part of a Chinese tributary system is that means you are allowed to trade with China. China, back then, you only grant unlimited trade access to its market to its own tributaries. So Koreans, Vietnamese.
You're saying it was like a tariff. Basically, you send tribute as a fee to be able to trade in China.
It's, if you talk to historians from Okinawa, from Korea, from Vietnam, they will tell you because the tribute a lot of time is symbolic. They're actually getting a higher return from China, from the gifts from the emperor. So in fact, it was beneficial for these countries. I mean, the relationship between China and Vietnam is a little bit more complicated, but with Okinawa, it was very purely
like a dozen times thereabouts.
I say they're a bit complicated,
and Korea.
but Korea. Okinawa, because Okinawa was voluntarily.
Who'd invade Okinawa? Except us.
Japan invaded Okinawa, yes. And right. United States invaded Okinawa.
I doubt China was not so concerned with invading Okinawa. But the point is this. If China's neighbors are scared, I feel like they don't want to return to a system where they're voluntary tributaries of China. That's not what they're scared of. It's not what worries them. A lot of these countries have a history of conflict with China. Some don't, but many do. And so they're scared about what kind of boss China's going to be. And so my thought is this: China is not yet a hegemon. It's not there yet. But I'd say that the United States is U.S. power is rapidly going down. It's waning, right? The United States in COVID has proven itself.
Only in relative terms. Only in relative terms.
In absolute terms,
right
too.
now.
In absolute terms, too,
Look,
our power is shrinking.
Look, Pentagon just put out a proposal for a 500-ship Navy. Okay, I mean, like right now, the U.S. military is more than the next
They can't even
several
keep their
military
ships from
combined.
crashing into each other, man.
Sure. I mean, that's just been part of a large bureaucracy, but
The
the
U.S.
fact
Navy
is that
stretched
the
incredibly
our
thin.
power.
Yeah, the U.S. still has power, but okay, number one, COVID has exposed the extreme dysfunction and incompetence of the United States government. That's important.
Okay, there's no argument about that. Yeah.
Now people know the U.S. government can't do stuff like it used to be able to. And in terms of military, it's not clear, but the U.S. military was severely weakened by the Iraq War, Afghanistan War, by ISIS conflict, not just degraded its operational efficiency, and also caused it to focus on things like counterinsurgency, which are not very effective for being the kind of great power it used to be. So there's a lot of ways in which and economically the United States is weakening. The United States population growth is going down. Trump has cut off immigration, which was our biggest advantage. That was our biggest source of power, was immigration. And some people like Matt Iglesias have said we need to get power back by taking much more immigration. But it's just not going to happen. People don't want it. Like America has entered, and America is in a cold civil war, I would call it, where Americans essentially hate each other and much more than they could ever hate China. Like, I know Americans say negative opinions about China, but Americans' number one enemy is other groups of Americans. And that's going to be true for a while. And countries in that situation always get dramatically weaker, and their ability to project power overseas gets dramatically weaker. So my thesis is that America is getting rapidly weaker. And so everyone is wondering if China will somehow fill the power gap. And if it does, what kind of hegemon would it be? Would it be like the United States? Would it be different? Would it, and I think that lack of knowledge about whether China will step into the role of hegemony and what that would even mean is scaring a lot of people. And I think that when people talk about stuff like the Uyghur concentration camps or something like that, it's expressing the fear of what kind of global leader China will be when America goes down.
Okay, we are both Americans, so let's focus on America's role, right? Okay. Do we really need to be a global hegemon? And like when you talk about America growing weaker, a lot of the instances you listed, like Iraq War, the COVID response, these are all self-inflicted. Right?
Absolutely.
All self-inflicted. I mean,
they are.
How about we really need to stretch ourselves thin all across the globe to engage in wars in Middle East, in Eastern Europe, or in East Asia? Why can't we just, I actually thought about this. Do we need to maintain an empire to maintain our standard of living? And I think the answer is no, because if you look at the example of Britain lost its empire. People in Britain now, they live better than they were 50 years ago. So sure. Why couldn't America do that?
It absolutely could. Point being, I think this is a moot question because partially due to inevitable factors, but also in large part due to America's mistakes and internal divisions, we can't. So the question of should we do this is like somewhat becoming rapidly more irrelevant because we don't have the capacity to do it. America is just too weak and incompetent and internally divided, especially internally divided. We never would have elected a guy like Trump who fucked up COVID, who just fucked up everything. We never would have elected a dipshit like that unless we hated each other enough to elect that kind of guy. He is a symptom.
Do you really think Hillary would do a better job in handling the COVID response?
Oh, yes, of course. Yes, of course she would. But Trump isn't the only problem of division. So partly, COVID got politicized. The red state people said, they made it a matter of ideology to like open restaurants, and then far right people didn't want to wear masks and things like that. That also was an effect of internal division that didn't even depend on Trump. So America's internal divisions are just massively weakening our society and our country in every possible way. And it's not just Trump. I mean, Trump's a big deal, but it's not just Trump. It's that everything gets politicized, and stupidity is rewarded if it attacks the other side. Like people just want to own the libs or whatever, right? They just want to own the other side, and that's the motivation.
I agree.
Why did China why was China weak for 100 years? Because it was in a civil war. That's why. It wasn't because China suddenly shrank.
There's also the foreign invasion part,
yes,
like the
foreign
Opium
invasions.
War.
That's right. Yes, don't get me wrong, that was important.
Invasion.
But ultimately, it was because China was disunited. And as soon as China became strongly united again, its power started increasing.
But the problem with US, as you mentioned, it's not just Trump. It's a structural problem, right? We have a system where it's easier for our politicians to make grandstandings on socially divisive issues because you don't have to do anything. You can just say, I am for this, I'm against this, I'm for abortion, I'm against abortion. They don't have to do anything. They don't have to do the hard work of actually building up the country. Right? I mean, like that's what our elite have been basically giving up the responsibility to reinvest in this country's future. Instead, they try to get votes by taking the easy way out, which is taking stands on socially divisive issues.
Yes.
And now what we end up is a country without, with a dilapidated infrastructure. We're still spending a lot of money on the war machine because that we do have.
So did Soviet Union. They did too. It didn't help them.
I mean, I think there's a lot of structural problem with our system, our society. I unfortunately I don't see a quick fix. I mean, like that's. Trump just made it worse. I mean, Trump didn't make all these things happen. Trump just kind of exposed all the fault lines in the society already. Now,
Yes.
but your question is really what the world would look like, when U.S. become stop being the world global hegemon, right?
Right, which is
and I think.
And the question is, who but China can step into that gap? Who else? No one else has the power.
You are assuming China even want to step into that role. I mean,
Maybe
why
they
would
don't.
China want to take over?
I'm not assuming. I'm not saying they do. I'm saying that if anyone is going to be the global top dog at all, and maybe no one will, but if anyone will be, China's the only one who really can be, because they're the ones who have the size and the economic vitality and the institutional, state capacity, institutional effectiveness. They have a system that works. And
okay, I agree. But in a way, China is very similar to United States because for a lot of the Chinese people, they're just as parochial as Americans, right? Americans, they're a little bit better than Americans because Americans can't find other countries on a map, but Chinese probably a little bit better, but they're still mostly concerned about what's going on inside China. Just like Americans are mostly concerned about what's happening in our borders, right?
And most people just want to make money and have a family. Most people aren't thinking about this.
Yeah, and so what is driving? I mean, I don't see, I don't see, something that drives China to take the role of United States right now as a global hegemon, because if we can look at the track record, what China has done in the last 40 years, right? I mean China's foreign policy after Mao's death has been very pragmatic. China didn't care what ideology of a country, as long as we can trade as long as they're not, recognizing Taiwan or welcoming Dalai Lama, China will trade with you. And China wanted.
All right, so Mao, if you want to go back to Mao, I mean, I think modern China really began with Deng. But if you want to go back to Mao, Mao invaded a bunch of places. Mao launched a lot of foreign invasions and conquests. Such as he invaded Vietnam, he invaded India, he invaded, Tibet. He conquered Tibet.
Okay. First of all, Vietnam, the Sino-Vietnamese war happened in 1979. That's after Mao died.
After Mao.
So,
after Mao.
And while Mao was alive, China was one of the main backer of North Vietnam, right?
Until the Soviets took over.
Vietnam War.
Until the Soviets really took over.
Well, Mao. Okay. So you can't blame Vietnam on Mao. You cannot blame Vietnam on Mao.
You're right. But it was pre Deng Xiaoping.
And Mao, you're right. I mean, China did fought a lot of war outside its borders. I mean, Korea. But I wouldn't call that invasion. China was invited by North Korea to come over. So I mean, that's not an invasion.
Come on, guys, come in and attack. I mean,
really? Because North Korea was on the verge of being wiped out by MacArthur's United Nations forces.
I recall China
they were
taking
their
over
last
South
was
Korea.
on the Yalu River.
China occupied Seoul.
Yes, but that's after United States, despite warning from China, pushed north of 38th parallel. Zhou Enlai told through the Indian Prime Minister of India told United States, don't cross 38th parallel. We don't care what you do in South Korea. But MacArthur crossed the 38th parallel, and that was a red line for China. And so
I know,
China,
but it wasn't on Chinese soil, so it was a foreign war that they got involved in. It just was.
It was, yeah, but they were invited, right? They were invited by Kim Il-sung, the North Korean leader, and for Sino-Indian War, that was a border dispute, right? I mean,
absolutely,
it's a disputed territory. It's a disputed territory.
So
both sides were fighting, and
that was a border dispute too.
No,
No, it just ended up with
invaded
the United
Mexico.
States taking a lot of territory.
U.S. has no claim on California, on Texas, U.S. had no claim. These parts were Mexican territory.
What is a claim? A claim is just a map where you said, this is ours, and then you send an army to enforce it. That's all it's ever been. That's all it is with China and India. That's all it's ever been anywhere. What is China's claim on Tibet?
That's wrong.
What is China's claim on Tibet? Nothing. We have an army. It's us now. I drew a line on a map, and it's us now, and my army's there.
Tibet was part of the Qing Empire, and if you look at all the Chinese map in World War II, while China was under Chiang Kai-shek, you will show Tibet as part of China. Like Tibet was.
But what does that change?
Was never recognized.
Saying,
look at American map.
That's just saying China conquered this place before, so we can conquer it again.
No, because nobody recognized Tibet as an independent country. I mean, not even United States, not even Great Britain.
Country. Absolutely, Tibet was an independent country for a while. Tibet has been independent in the past.
No country recognized its status as an independent country. No country in the world recognized Tibet. Now, United States did not recognize it. Great Britain didn't recognize it. In fact, United States and Great Britain both recognized Tibet as part of China while Chiang Kai-shek was in power. So China was sending troops to its own territory.
To its own territory. The Tibetans didn't think it was its own.
Well,
the people
it's different
who lived there didn't think that China was sending troops to its own territory. They were pretty unhappy about it, as I recall.
Sure. I mean, there will be people unhappy about it. I mean,
conquer places. They send an army. They draw a line on a map, and they say, "This is ours now." That's called having an empire.
No, I'm just telling you. Tibet was part of the Qing Empire. The only, and it was recognized as part of China it has been recognized. It was never been recognized as an independent country by any country in the world. So
here's my question. Here's my question. If Japan became militaristic again, suppose Japan became militaristic again and said and sent troops to Taiwan and drew maps that showed Taiwan as part of Japan because Taiwan was part of the Japanese Empire before, and said, this is our territory. We're sending troops to our own territory, and Japan took over Taiwan in the future. I'm just hypothetical. They could say, well, oh, look, previous claim. We had this before, so it's ours now. And the Taiwanese people are like, no. But then Japan's like, yes, you were us before.
There's no country in the world right now recognize Taiwan as part of Japan right now. As all countries in the world recognize Tibet as part of China. I mean, that has never changed. That was no country in the world ever recognized Tibet as an independent country, and all of them recognize Tibet as part of China. So your analysis, your comparison is invalid because no country recognized Taiwan as part of Japan currently, right? No country.
Yeah, but what if Japan became powerful again? They might. They might say, Japan's powerful, so we might as well recognize Taiwan as part of Japan.
Countries in the world recognize Taiwan as part of Japan, whereas every country in the world recognized Tibet as part of China.
Before. They did when Japan ruled Taiwan.
Nobody recognized Tibet as part of independent country. Who recognized Tibet as independent?
I'm saying people used to recognize Taiwan as part of Japan. People used to.
Well, that's because there was a treaty signed between China and Japan after Japan defeated China. There was a treaty where China ceded Taiwan to Japan because Taiwan before was a Chinese territory, and it was transferred via treaty because China lost a war. But it's not a matter of it's very obvious to me,
Carl, we have a word for this, for the practice of saying that any territory that we controlled before, we have a right to control again. It's called irredentism.
Lesson. If Tibet has been recognized as an independent country by countries in any country in the world, or majority of the country in the world, I would agree with you. But no country in the world ever recognized Tibet as an independent country, and all countries in the world have recognized Tibet as part of China. So it's not just China making the claim; it's all the countries recognize Chinese claim.
So what you're saying
before
to me,
1950,
what you're saying to me is that if a bunch of imperial powers tell China that Tibet is part of China's legitimate empire, then those other imperial powers' sanction gave China the right to send troops to Tibet. Despite the wishes of the local people.
Imperial power has no say, but countries
when you said no one recognized, that's who it was. It was a bunch of empires. It was like, Britain and France and US, and those were the countries, like, back in, like, before World War II, before decolonization. That's who you were talking about when you talk about recognition. You're talking about those other empires. Like, that's who was dishing out the recognition and saying, okay, China, Tibet is yours.
There's Thailand, there's Thailand, there's Iran that's still independent.
There's Thailand.
Ethiopia.
True. Yes, Thailand and Ethiopia.
I'm telling you, there's no country in the world, right? Soviet Union, right? No country in the world recognized Tibet as an independent country. If everybody, it's like if everyone recognized Texas, as part of the United States.
Wait, Carl.
Right?
Wait a second. I found one. Mongolia.
Yes, but Mongolia wasn't recognized as an independent country back then. Mongolia only became formally independent in 1946. I know the treaty you're talking about, the treaty between Mongolia and Tibet recognizing each other's independence after 1911, after the Chinese Revolution. But why do you think Stalin made Chiang Kai-shek sign a treaty in 1946 to recognize Mongolia as an independent country, because China has a claim on Mongolia, and that's a claim that Chiang Kai-shek gave up in 1946.
All right, so here's
in
my
return
question.
for Stalin's support. Yes.
If China sent troops to Mongolia and took it over now, would that be justified by the fact that China controlled Mongolia before?
No.
Okay.
No. That will be an invasion, yes. Because right now, Mongolia is a member of the United Nations. It's recognized by all the countries in the world as an independent country. So if China does that, it's a clear case of invasion. It's international law is international law. I don't make it up.
Okay. So when we're talking about past instances of China violating international law with invasions, we have to limit it to invasion of South Korea, India, Vietnam. So all right, we'll limit it to those. But this is a little bit of a sidetrack anyway, because I think we both agree that the pre-Deng Xiaoping China like isn't the modern China. Like it's different. Like
I disagree. I think modern China began. I think modern China began in 1800s. You know, when the Europeans came, even before the Europeans came. I mean, like what you're talking about, the modern Chinese state, of People's Republic of China. That obviously began with Mao. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, like,
but
then it is an iteration. Is just another second iteration, but it's still part of the same state.
Under Mao, China was very ideological in terms of communism.
Yeah.
It wanted to spread communism to other countries and support communism as this ideology. Do you think that is true of China today?
No, not at all. I mean, it hasn't been since Deng Xiaoping came to power. He made it very explicit that China will stop exporting revolution. I mean, even before Xi Jinping. Even before Xi Jinping took power, he made a speech in Mexico. He's criticizing taking umbrage as a Western criticism of China. He's like, "What's wrong with you guys? You know, we're not exporting a revolution anymore. You know, like, what do you want? You know, what do you want from us?"
So what I'm saying,
which is true.
What I'm saying is this. So I think we're agreeing about this. I think what I'm saying is during Deng and Jiang Zemin and Hu Jintao, I think people were basically not afraid that China was an expansionist power. I think that they were not really afraid of that. No one was afraid that China was an expansionist power at that time, I think.
China was much weaker back then. China is much smaller size.
China was stronger. China was stronger in 2010, a lot stronger in 2010 than it was in 1975. Okay.
It is, but Mao was, like you said, Mao was promoting revolution everywhere. He was supporting revolution all over Southeast Asia. Then wasn't doing that.
Yes, so we're not disagreeing. I'm agreeing. I'm saying the reason people weren't very scared of China in 2010, but might be scared now, is I think many people have perceived China as having changed between 2010 and now.
I would dispute that. I live in Southeast Asia right now. I'm in Bali. I'm in Indonesia. In Southeast Asia, there has been always a fear of kind of the Chinese, creeping Chinese influence. I mean, even back from the Mao days, right? I mean, that's why there had been a coup here in Indonesia in 1965. You know, there was a big massacre of all the supposedly the communist members in Indonesia, and the targeting of ethnic Chinese. And this is all like related because the fear of the So depending on which part of the world you're talking about, right? In Southeast Asia, there has always been a fear of like the China, like even like in the Mao days, right? So, but in the other countries, say like Japan and South Korea, that's because Japan and South Korea they're allies of the United States. right? And there were, and also Japan and South Korea also have fairly strong economies vis-a-vis China. Until, I mean, the size of Chinese economy only started to really grow in the last, I say, since 2000, since early 2000, right? Because I remember even like just before in 1998, there was a sinologist by the name of, I think, Gerald Segal. He wrote an op-ed, I think in Foreign Affairs, saying, we should not be worry about concern with China too much. China is just a mid-sized country like Brazil, like we shouldn't even care about, the Chinese sentiment. We should deal with them as we would dealing with a mid-sized power like Brazil, right? I mean,
that was stupid at the time. That was a stupid thing to say.
Back then.
Yeah, but it was dumb.
Well, that was a stupid take. But back then, because the Chinese economy was like the size of Brazil, that's why people can have these stupid notions in their head. But right now, Chinese economy is magnitude different from 20 years ago, right? I mean,
yes.
You wouldn't imagine 20 years ago a Chinese social media app would be capturing like Zoomers in United States, right?
Well,
I'm talking about TikTok,
but maybe many people wouldn't. So okay, so let me try to keep us on track here. I think that basically my thesis is that due to, of course, Chinese economic growth, but also to dramatic American weakening, and also to the fact that Xi Jinping, to some people, seems like a different kind of leader from the people who came right before him. I think that's scaring people, and I think I would also like to bring it to one thing that we've, that gets a lot of argument on Twitter, which is Xinjiang and what's going on in Xinjiang.
Sure.
Obviously, there's lots of repression of people going on in many countries in the world. I could name them. There's like genocide in Burma. There's all kinds of bad things going on. Which ones people choose to pay attention to matter. It shows you what people are thinking about. I think the reason people are freaked out about what's going on in Xinjiang is not necessarily out of a sense of altruism, although people are altruistic to some degree. Like, they don't like hearing about atrocities, but the reason they're focusing on that is because it feels like it gives people this preview of what a dominant China might be like. If China under Xi Jinping and going forward is willing to do this to a whole ethnic group, put them in these weird re-education camps and monitor them and surveil them all the time, and all this, destroy all these religious sites and all this massive social control with these giant ass prisons that it puts people into. If China's willing to do that to a whole group of people, what will it do to the rest of us? I think people are scared.
Well, I think there's there's a context to that. Most of the source of the story come from this, U.S. intelligence agency adjacent media sources. It came from RFA, Radio Free Asia, which is just a CIA cutout. And then, a lot of the story we're hearing come from ASPI, right? ASPI is an Australian think tank. Half of its sponsors are U.S. weapon manufacturers like Lockheed Martin and Raytheon, right? I mean, these people have their own motives, right, to promote a certain narratives of China.
And I checked this. I found a whole bunch of different sources. Yeah, I know ASPI is a big deal, and there's a lot of think tanks peripherally connected to the U.S. government.
I'll tell you,
the Australian government. But a lot of independent journalists have looked this up. The New York Times and BuzzFeed and the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. And I just, a lot of people have looked into this, and
yes, I cite two sources. I read all these reports.
There's a lot of defectors there's a lot of people who escaped.
There's like two main sources.
There's a lot of evidence for this.
Right?
There's a lot of evidence.
So So first, let me address. There's the most sensational claim is million Uyghur is being put into concentration camps, right? China File actually did an article, I think in 2018, that traced two main sources of all these stories. One is Washington-based China Human Rights Defenders, which is NED, National Endowment for Democracy funded NGO, right? And they're the first to come out with the claim, and their methodology was in their paper, which I read. They interview 8 villagers from 8 villages around southern Kashgar, and based on the interview result, they extrapolated to the whole population of Xinjiang. That's how they arrive at 1 million Uyghur figure. They took testimonial from 8 people, and then based on what they gathered from the data from those 8 villages, they extrapolated to whole of Xinjiang and to the entire population of Uyghurs. That's how they arrive at the figure of 1 million Uyghur in concentration camps. The other
research,
let me finish.
If it's 500,000 instead of 1 million, should we be less scared?
Okay, that's a fair point. I mean, Chinese government itself admitted there were they're building so-called vocational training centers. I mean, what they claim is a huge de-radicalization program, right, which netted a lot of people, and their stated goal is they will reintegrate them back into society. Now, this is obviously very heavy-handed. This is something only China has a resource and capability to carry out, right? And
that's scary.
Let's just assume everything they said is true. Even the CIA-funded media or all. Let's just assume everything.
Let's say all the worst stuff is true.
Yeah, let's just assume all the worst scenarios.
Okay.
What the Chinese government policy affects are the people who are Chinese citizens living inside the border of People's Republic of China.
Yes.
Right? You and I, American passport holders, what can Chinese government do to us? Nothing. Chinese government have no jurisdiction over us. You know, you are comfortably sitting in your friend's house, right? I'm in Bali. What can the Chinese government do to us? Nothing, right? So this is
good.
This is giving it
good. The fact that is a comfort is scary. The fact that we can sit here and say, "Oh my God, I'm so glad the Chinese government has no power over me," is reason to think that the Chinese government is scary. Okay, so let's talk about what it could affect. So Taiwan, right? We could argue about whether Taiwan's legitimately a part of China, but let's talk about the practical consequences. Taiwan has 23 million people, and suppose that China reintegrates, i.e. conquers Taiwan with military force. What is China going to do to the population of Taiwan after that? I have a lot of friends who are either from Taiwan or have relatives in Taiwan, and Taiwan's a great place. It's so cool. It's a great civilization, economically successful, socially dynamic, and creates lots of interesting stuff, and just a pretty happy society. What is going to happen to that if the People's Republic of China reintegrates that? Will there be de-radicalization centers for people?
So China and Taiwan has been separated at the end of the Chinese Civil War in 1949. And now it's what, 2020? How many years is that? It's we're on to the 71st year, right? So China hasn't do anything in the 71 years. What do you think China is going to do that now? I mean, what Why China have put it off for 71 years and now they just suddenly decided, you know what, we're going to liberate Taiwan today.
China's state-run media just warned Taiwan's president that a violation of its anti-secession law could lead to a war that would see Taiwan wiped out. That happened a couple days ago.
Chinese state media says a lot of stupid shit. Okay, and you know, you are to take. Do you take what Trump says seriously? I mean, like,
yes.
Should we take? I mean,
yes.
like Trump.
I do. And it's fucking scary. If Trump says he's not going to accept the results of an election, I take that seriously. Trump said he was going to kick out all the immigrants. He's been doing that. He's been doing a lot of the bad things he said he would do. There's been analyses of Trump's promises that scared a lot of people. He has made headway towards doing all of them. Like, Trump tries to do all the stuff he says he's going to do.
So Trump
China's state media is scary.
So Trump have a good track record. So China has been talking about liberating Taiwan militarily since 1949. You know, we are on the 71st year now, right? What has happened? Nothing. Nothing has happened for 71 years. China has, I mean, I can give you posters, I can give you like shows, you know, like ever since 1979, China had been 1949, China had been talking about liberating Taiwan.
But we
now,
started
71 years later, China.
Right, but we started this discussion with a discussion of all the ways in which the status quo is changing, right? So America is getting super weak. This is the first time in 71 years that America will be too weak to defend Taiwan. Maybe that's
what are you talking about? U.S. has like the largest military force in the world. I mean, like right now, U.S. have 2 aircraft carriers sailing the South China Sea in so-called the freedom. What is it?
Navigation.
The FON.
Freedom
freedom of navigation patrol. Yeah. I mean, the U.S. spy planes are circling the Chinese coast right now. I mean, like, how is United States weak? You know, U.S. has based missile systems in South Korea. United States have military bases all lining all around China, right? Like, I mean, the right now. You're assuming China is just waiting for a chance to pounce on Taiwan, right? But you have to think about what is the rationale.
What it's doing. It certainly says that. That's what it says in all these state media.
It's been saying that for 71 years, right? Like you said,
Maybe it was Trump has the whole time. Maybe they've been just waiting that whole time. Why not?
Come on, you said you are scared of Trump because Trump does what he says.
Tries to.
Okay, I give you that. If Trump has a good track record. Chinese government have been saying you will liberate Taiwan for 71 years. And I'm just telling you, nothing has happened.
Okay.
Why would it be different?
All right, well, here's my point. If our main reason to reassure us about the bad things China won't do is that China is full of hot air and will be unable to do them, then that's less than reassuring, because what it means is that we should put our faith in Chinese inertia and, you know, like being full of crap and not following through on what it says and being, you know, just like all this stuff.
No, that
doesn't make me feel better. I don't think that makes a lot of people feel better.
That's not true at all, because there will be a cost. Right? If every action will be an equal opposite reaction, right? We're talking about Newtonian physics here. So there will be a cost for China to militarily reintegrate Taiwan. And China is not stupid, right? We cannot assume, you know, the other world leaders are just irrational. You know, that's a really bad assumption.
Okay,
China is fully aware if they were to launch a military occupation of Taiwan, there will be a international backlash, right? And particularly led by United States. And right now, China very much depend on trade with the outside world. It very much depends on global integration, right? Right now, U.S. is the one that's pushing for decoupling from China. It's not China. China is fine
China's
with
been also
coupling,
pushing.
right?
China's also been pushing pretty hard. So what China's been doing in recent decades, there's a lot of economic evidence on this, is internalizing supply chains has been a big push. And now what China's new economic strategy, the Made in China 2025 plan, and some other plans, are trying to basically make in China anything that the United States makes, so that the United States can't use export controls to hurt Chinese companies. And so the idea is for China to become a lot more economically self-sufficient. And China has made a lot of progress toward that. It's not there yet. But it's made a lot of progress. And if the United States has a civil war or weakens more, and if China's Made in 2025 succeeds, which I think it has a decent chance of succeeding in a lot of this stuff, then China's economic dependence on America and whatever will fall. And I think China doesn't worry about Europe.
So what you're saying is China is doing the smart thing, because given what Trump is doing right now, nobody would trust the United States ever again.
No,
to have
of course they're doing the smart thing.
US basically.
But I'm saying the smart thing might also allow them to do bad things.
See, this is like you are assuming there's a lot of assumption going into this, right? You're examining this from the worst possible light, right? But what is a motive? What is a motive for China to do something bad, right? Let's establish, like there's a Chinese saying, you don't wake up early unless there's a profit to be made. How would it profit China to do something bad? To like countries outside of China's borders, right? That's essentially what we're talking about.
We already established
that China has full control over its own borders. It does things with its own citizens. It has power, whatever. But we are not affected, right? The fact is, United States is the one that in the last 30 years has been launching wars and invasions. So if I'm a Iraqi, I'm less likely to be affected by, like a Chinese military occupation, right? than say from the United States. I mean, that has been the reality for the last 30 years. I mean, same thing in Africa, right? Now China is in Africa building roads, hospitals, ports, etc. We're crying that China is doing neo-colonialism, right? We're saying China is colonizing Africa. But a very important distinction is China is not holding gun to anybody's head to do business with, right? Back then, colonialism happened with gunboat diplomacy. China is not sending its military to Africa. It's not forcing anybody to take any deals.
Right. Okay. So here's my point. I agree with that. We're getting a little sidetracked. Oh, by the way, your video cut out. Can you turn off video and turn on again?
Okay.
Yeah. Let's see if that works. All right. Okay. So what I'm saying is the reason people are concerned about Xinjiang is not because people feel threatened because, like, I'm not a Uyghur, I'm not going to be put in a re-education center or de-radicalization center or whatever. It's not going to happen to me. But in the future, if you see that, like, suppose that you live in a town with a sheriff, right? And the sheriff used to be really good at his job, or sometimes he was a dick, but then he was at least, people were scared of him, or he was competent, let's say. And now he became an alcoholic, and he's getting old, and he's not going to last in his job much longer, right? And you see some other guy who might become sheriff after him, and you notice that he beats his kids. And you say, well, this guy beats his kids. I'm not his kid, so I'm not threatened by that. But if he becomes sheriff of this town, I'm worried about what kind of sheriff he's going to be, noticing that he beats his kids. And that's the closest analogy I can come up with. I think people are worried about Xinjiang not just on humanitarian concerns, but because it's sort of this, and not because they're personally threatened by it, because they're not, but because they see this as sort of an indicator of what kind of power China might be if it replaces the United States.
Again, I reject that premise. The premise you're making is that China, again, will be a global hegemon, right? China will become United States what it is today. It's like
Maybe
nobody has to behave exactly like United States, right? Nobody is forced to behave exactly like United States. Nobody is forced to take United's role.
Nor did the United States behave just like the British Empire. We didn't. You know, no two powerful countries are exactly alike. They're all different. And we don't really know what China's going to be in the future. So it's not an assumption. It's just a risk. You know, it's just a question of like, you know, it's scary, not because we know that not because we think China's going to be just like the US, but China will have all this massive, massive power to do with whatever it wants. And seeing stuff like Xinjiang probably makes people scared, and it makes me scared about what kind of things China might want to do outside its borders too.
I don't entirely agree with that. I don't think people are necessarily scared of China. It's more like, you know, there's a lot of time the Holocaust is being invoked when people talk about China and Xinjiang, right? And I think there's a lot of projection of what has happened in the West's own history, right? Where genocide, we're talking about Holocaust. We are projecting our own past into what's happening in China right now. And in doing so, we're assuming the worst. We're assuming China, again, it's a projection. We're assuming China is doing exactly what the West has done in the past. And now you are assuming China is going to do in the future what the United States is doing currently, right?
It's not an assumption.
It's an assumption built on assumption.
A risk is different than an assumption.
I mean, so let's take North Korea example, right? I mean, a lot of the media reporting on North Korea is based on the assumption that the North Korean leaders are irrational and crazy, right? That they would,
I don't think that's true.
I do hear that. I was actually I was surfing in San Clemente, SoCal, and beautiful day, right? And there's two surfers next to me, and they're saying, "Oh, I'm worried about North Korea," and I really wanted to paddle over there and smack them over the head. It's like, North Korea present no threat to United States at all, right? But they're scared because they're consuming food. Yeah, that's a different
maybe
story.
They're BTS
these are
fans,
Americans.
Okay? Maybe they're BTS fans, and they're worried that North Korea will destroy K-pop.
They're like 40 years old, man. They're 40 years old.
I don't know. Anyway, all right. So we don't have infinite time. So there's one more topic I wanted to talk about, which is this idea that Americans have many reasons to criticize China, some of which I think are good and some of which I think are stupid. But there's this idea that if Americans criticize China, that will lead to increased racism against Asian Americans. And you've seen this idea, right? I mean, like a number of people have expressed this, including in discussion threads we've had. And so I think that there's this fear. What do you think of that idea? Oh no, you're frozen again. Shoot. Can you hear me? Hello? Carl. All right, you're having some issues.
Myself. Good. Okay, let me restart my video. So, okay, I heard your question. Yes. Okay, there's a couple things. Right now, in the media, there's a lot of scary stories about China, and there's a lot of negative portrayal of China, right? In a confluence of factors, right? We know the White House under Trump is actually pushing media to shifting the blame of COVID on China, right? And I think it's working to a certain extent. A lot of Americans are blaming China for COVID, well, at least initially. And we do see that carry over to not just Chinese Americans, but anybody of East Asian appearance, right? Because we all know we can't tell the difference, right? So anybody who remotely looks East Asian, racism always exists in United States. Like it's not something that just popped up like in the last 5 months or after Trump came to power. It's just now people have an excuse, like Trump coming to power just made it acceptable for some people to come out of the woodworks to express themselves, right? They have been racist long before. It's now they're just more comfortable to coming out, and I think that's what's happened, right?
I agree.
I think it's obvious the side effect of all the Sinophobia that's being whipped up by the media is negatively impacting not only Chinese Americans but all people of East Asian descent and appearance in United States. It's obvious. We read about attacks on people because they're East Asian. And like, which is so stupid because you would think if you don't want to catch COVID, you want to stay away from a person if they think they're a carrier. You don't go there and actually physically beat them up and then really contracting COVID yourself. But these are just racist.
Want to beat someone up.
Yeah, yes. They're just acting out.
Yeah, they're acting out. And so I guess maybe we don't really disagree on this, but my thought is that is shit and needs to be cracked down on hard. We need to crack down, but I don't think we should let our crackdown on anti-Asian racism. I don't think that should stop us from criticizing the Chinese government when it does bad stuff, because the Chinese government isn't like this, isn't the representative of global Asian people at all.
Sure. The China, U.S. it's a free country, right? We have freedom of speech. We're free to express, to criticize Chinese government. Now let me ask you a question, Noah. You are a person of influence, right? You have almost 190K followers on Twitter. You write a column for Bloomberg, and then you have a large audience. Now, do you think you make more impact on U.S. or on China?
A very tiny impact on the U.S. and zero impact on China.
Okay, so let's focus on U.S. So when you criticize U.S., obviously it's more likely to yield results than, say, if you criticize China. Do you agree?
Yes.
Okay. Now, we're Americans. We both know there's a lot of problem in our own countries. The system is broken, is dysfunctional. That's why we have Trump in the White House, right? Shouldn't we put more of our effort to fix our own problem?
Of course. Of course.
And
I certainly
China
do.
leave that.
I spend much more time talking about Trump and COVID and America's problems than I do talking about China. It's just a topic that occasionally comes up. I definitely spend the bulk of my time, and I almost never write any Bloomberg columns. And my main, you talk about Twitter, but my main media presence is my Bloomberg articles. And
sure.
And occasionally I'll write something about the Chinese economy, but I'll never write about these national security issues. I think I did once, I wrote about the economic risks of conflict, but basically never. And certainly, international affairs isn't my thing. I don't know about that. Like, I'm talking about it, but like, it's not really my area. And so, yeah, no, I'm spending like almost all my time criticizing, talking about the problems of the United States. But like, sometimes I talk about Chinese stuff, and then, and I am an American, but I also think it's too nationalistic to think that people should only care about their own countries, because I also care about what happens to like Taiwan, and I care about what happens to Japan, where I lived for 3.5 years and might live again. And I mean, I'm sure you'd also care about what happens to Indonesia, right? Like,
I mean, but my point is that, I'm more sensitive to this. When I was first came to United States in 1990, I had to try very hard to find any news about China, right? Now it's like China, China, China 24/7, right? It's clogging up our airwave. Now, why do you think that is? And like, why are we like all the Americans? Most average Americans know very little about China, right?
That's true.
They don't even have much context. But yet we're talking about China all the time. Why is that? Why do you think that
because I think COVID made Americans realize their country is not the world's most effective and powerful country anymore, very quickly. And I think that the anxiety of suddenly realizing how dysfunctional and weak their country is make some Americans lash out, make some Americans think about the kind of world that comes after American power, and make some people, so there's a number of things associated with that. It makes people anxious, and some people just want to lash out. Like, they're like, well, fuck you, China, you gave us COVID or whatever. And some people are just like, okay, well, America's going down, I might have to move out of the country. Like, I've considered moving, I've always wanted to live some more time in Japan. And I'm worried if I move to Japan and America collapses into civil war, I can sit in Japan and go, oh, fuck, America collapsed. But then, now, who's the most powerful country near me? China. And so that would worry me. Or suppose that I don't want to go live in Taiwan, but suppose I did want to go live in Taiwan, it would worry me. Or South Korea, maybe. Maybe India, I don't know. So like, I think that I'm not just concerned about what happens in America. And as America gets weaker, my concern over what happens outside of America increases. But I don't want to lash out, I don't blame China for COVID. That's dumb. And I don't want to lash out at other people. I'm not mad about this. I'm sad that America is so dysfunctional, but I'm not mad at other countries about it. We did it to ourselves. But it still worries me. Like, what kind of world are we going to live in, and who's going to be in charge of that world, and what does that mean?
Fair enough. I mean, what you're saying is basically a lot of these talk about China is really not about China. It's really about projecting our fear, our anxiety, onto this great unknown, right? Which is kind of represented by China. We don't know what the future is going to be like with China being the top economic economy in the world, right?
Exactly.
I mean, it's a fear of anxiety. I mean, I read John Fairbank. He's like one of the top American expert on China. The ultimate China hand. He has talked about this kind of the Western narrative about China back from the time when the Europeans first made contact. A lot of the Western writing, about China, a lot of time it's not really about China itself. China is used as a foil to project, how we talk about our internal issues. Like China is like this great other where we can project our fear, our anxiety, or our hopes onto, right? But a lot of time, not really about what's actually going on in China, because in most cases, people who write these things about China, some of them don't even have a lot of experience in China. Have you been to China, Noah?
Yes.
Oh, okay. Which year?
Oh, it was a while ago. I haven't been to China for a while. It was 2007 was the last time I went to China. So it was a long time ago.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's like Jurassic age in China. I mean,
Things change fast.
I go to China every 10 years. Like last time I was in China was last year, but before that I went to China in 2010. I mean, it's like every time I go, it's like a different country because things just happen on such a rapid pace.
That's one reason I'm scared, man, because it is a different country. That's why I'm not reassured by what happened in the 90s.
Just go there again. I mean, like it's, you as American, you can get like 10-year multi-entry visa to China. Well, after this, you have to wait for the COVID.
Yeah.
COVID
Plus,
thing
they don't like my employer. They don't like Bloomberg.
Well, don't go as a journalist. Go as a private citizen. Like a traveler.
They'll know who I am.
Right? I mean,
I'm not a real journalist anyway, but they might let me in. They might let me in.
I mean, like China, they keep a tight watch on journalists and stuff like that. But if you're just go as an individual traveler, they don't give a shit.
Right. So I went to. We have to wrap up soon, but I went to Hong Kong last year, and I went. Okay. I had never been to Hong Kong before, and my first time, and it was in November. And I went there and I saw some protests. I watched some, a number of the protests. And I talked to some of the protesters and asked them what it was all about, et cetera. And I really liked Hong Kong as a place. I liked the people I met. I thought the protesters were protesting for reasonable stuff. I mean, they wanted to vote, and like that's reasonable to me. And then, and I did see violence. I saw some protesters beating someone up. I did see that. I've seen violence in American protests. But so I don't want to paint it in black and white moral terms. But then what China's done with the security crackdown on Hong Kong since I went, in more recent months, I feel like, and with the idea that a lot of people in Hong Kong want to leave and are being prevented from leaving and are being kept there, it feels like something that was really cool is being crushed in terms of Hong Kong culture and society.
I mean, when you say crack, you're talking about the implementation of national security law in Hong Kong, right?
That's exactly right.
I mean, in terms of what what are the effects, right? I mean, like, as far as I'm aware, the main protest leaders, they're still. I think Joshua Wong was briefly arrested for maybe like a 72 hours or so, but they were released, right? I mean, so
but people aren't being allowed to leave.
When you say there was
people aren't being allowed to leave.
Yeah, the people who are not being allowed to leave is because they are being, they have police warrant out for them, right? Because of the protest activities, right? That's because and then as you mentioned yourself, you saw violence, you saw protester beating up people. So, So I mean,
like any protest, you'll see a little violence, and then most people will not be violent.
Sure.
Same with like BLM protests in America. You see a few protesters will beat someone up, but most will not want that at all.
Okay. I mean, when you say people are not being prevented from leaving, those are the people being.
Remember that whole boat?
Those are the people who are being wanted by the police. Yes, they're being wanted by the police, so they wanted to escape Hong Kong, and then they hire a boat to go to the Chinese waters, so they're now being detained in China for illegally crossing, for illegal crossing. And you know what? The funny thing is, they're actually now being held in mainland China because they crossed into the mainland Chinese waters, and now people in Hong Kong want them to be extradited back to Hong Kong to be tried under Hong Kong courts and Hong Kong laws. And guess what? guess what they protested against initially last year? They protested against an extradition treaty between mainland China and Hong Kong, right?
Going the opposite way.
Because they're
Anyway.
because there's no extradition
all right.
treaty between, yeah.
It's just one more example of, a place that felt really cool and, like a vibrant, somewhat fairly free, fairly happy society that's now really being cracked down on, and it worries me to see stuff like that.
Have you been back to Hong Kong?
No, it's COVID.
Like recently?
No, I can't.
Oh, right. So you are just reading from newspaper, mainstream media reporting, right? So, I mean, yeah. I would suggest that when the COVID is over, go back and see, because I think sometimes the impression you get from reading newspaper and from what you see firsthand is quite different. I mean, like, seeing is believing. That's my suggestion, because for me, even I'm being touted as like the biggest pro-China Twitter guy on Twitter, but I consume a lot of U.S. media on China, and I also ingested unconsciously a lot of negativity about China. But when I went to China last year, what I witnessed is quite different from what we read in newspapers. What I seen is my extended family, my cousins, my uncles, my aunties, they're living quite happily. They're living contently. I mean, like, whereas, what we reread is a really dark, negative picture of China as like kind of the Black Mirror, right? The 1984 Big Brother society. You're being watched every move. But when I was in China, it didn't feel like that. When I was on the ground talking to people are just living normally, and they're also having leading a happy, normal existence. So go to China after COVID is over. See for yourself. Go to Hong Kong.
All right. Well, anyway, been an interesting and fun debate. Thanks very much. Good to talk.
Yeah, thank you. Yes.
All right, and I'll catch you on Twitter. We'll see how it all shakes out.
Okay, sounds good.
And
nice talking to you.
All right, see you, man.